Sasakwala and Elie Wiesel founded Forum 2000 for a purpose.
We have to use the past to not becoming our children's future.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be here, and I want to thank President Dabo for convening another extraordinary gathering of Forum 2000.
So those people, they are peace, think more seriously, and we should develop new ideas, and then important is implementation.
Dámy a pánové, vážení přítomní, já vás co nejsrdečněji vítám na konferenci Forum 2000.
The world is upside down. How should we put it back together? Are we able to act responsibly? Can we work together, play by the rules, and restore solidarity? Let's use this crisis as an opportunity. A new world emerging? Watch the online Forum 2000 conference, October 12th to 14th.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're joining us today. Overshadowed by the current COVID-19 global context, this conference is taking place virtually rather than in Prague. While this expands the possibilities of participants to access the conference, it works against the kind of interpersonal network building that we have often taken for granted in the past. It is also taking place against the backdrop of a world in which the multilateral order is constantly under threat. It is only fitting then that I welcome you to this 24th Forum 2000 conference, whose theme this year interrogates a new world order, a new world emerging, restoring responsibility and solidarity. Our panel discussion this afternoon will question Africa's as a continent for the future. In the earlier part of the 1st century, Pliny the Elder noted that from Africa, always something new. And I'm humbled today to be moderating a rather distinguished and multi-talented panel of individuals who often wear very many hats. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to draw from your many hats to respond to some of the questions we have today. With apologies, one of the panelists, Glanis Changachirere from Zimbabwe, would not be joining us. But today I'm honored to welcome Aisha Dabo, who is a journalist, member of Africtivist, the West African think tank initiative. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I would also like to welcome Jeffrey Smith, the founding director of Vanguard Africa. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you. Today we would be interrogating a number of questions. Against the backdrop of COVID, what are the major challenges on the horizon for Africa? Aisha, over to you.
Thank you, Fonteh, for moderating this session. Hi, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be with you here on this panel. As you said, Fonteh, I am a project coordinator with Africtivist, which is a network of bloggers and cyber activists and social change agents on the African continent. We are about 200 from 40 African countries. So the major challenges actually are still the same, I would say, in a way, but heightened by COVID. Because what COVID showed and highlighted is the fact that when it comes to investment to basic social services like health, it remains a big problem in the continent. But because of early measures, the continent was able to, respond adequately, and we don't have the alarming, that's what everyone was hoping for. On the other hand, I know we're talking about challenges, but on the other hand, COVID also was an opportunity for leaders to look into the countries, inside their countries, for solutions, local solutions, and some of the head of states. And as we said, a new way, a new order is being created, a new way of seeing things is, finding local solutions to local problems instead of always looking outside. I want to focus on upcoming elections. There are many in Africa, but I would want to focus specifically on democracy and human rights. Because if you look at the situation we are in, despite COVID, some countries went ahead and held elections, and those elections didn't come up without challenges. Despite COVID, right now we're preparing for at least 7 or 8 more elections from now until October, and until December. And out of that, we have 2 head of states in Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire who changed the constitutions of their countries to impose and entrench themselves. And this because they're already controlling the system, because they're incumbents and they want to stand for another election. So human rights, democracy, good governance remains a challenge and will continue to be a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Thanks for those perspectives. I would like to switch over to Jeffrey and ask him, from his vantage point in Washington, D.C., what do you see as the 3 major challenges for Africa coming up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as Aisha said, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I promise, even though Aisha is a friend, we did not exchange notes beforehand. But interestingly, I was actually going to touch upon some of the same issues. I think for me, being the director of an organization that focuses quite a bit on free and fair elections and democratic leadership, one of the issues that I've been paying particular attention to and trying to raise awareness around is what I see as the growing void between citizen demands for democracy and accountable democratic leadership and the supply side on the part of the continent's leaders in the form of constitutional coups that Aisha referenced in Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire, rigged elections, and also the authoritarian pandemic, Fonteh, that you raised at the very outset, which has played out during this era of COVID-19. So I think, put simply, right now, across Africa, the demand for democracy is outstripping supply. And I think we've seen several areas in which, several areas that have emerged out of that. And the broader theme or the broader trend that we're seeing has been backed up by the evidence and data that's been collected by various think tanks and research organizations, Freedom House being among them, which classifies just 7 African countries today as being free. And that's actually the lowest total since 1990. At the same time, the data also shows an overwhelming majority of Africans still believe that democracy remains the best form of government, that free and fair multi-party elections remain the ideal way to choose their leaders. And while voter turnout is declining globally, actually over the years, it has been relatively stable in Africa over the past few decades. And more specifically, I think this speaks to the resilience of African populations who have really shown that their experience of one party or military rule has prepared them to fight this resurgence of authoritarianism that we've seen, particularly over the last few months during the coronavirus era. And I think this is where the key battle line has been drawn. For example, Aisha mentioned very prominently, and several African nations will be holding elections this month. In Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire, for example, 2 countries where incumbent rulers have forced through constitutional amendments, allowing them to stand for previously unconstitutional third terms. In Uganda, too, they have an upcoming election in February, in just 4 months now. And their long-ruling dictator, Yoweri Museveni, forced through a constitutional change of his own that eliminated presidential age limits, allowing him to once again stand as the ruling party candidate. Overall, presidential elections are set to take place in at least 10 of Africa's 54 countries over the next 5 months, and all the incumbents except for one in Niger want to stay in office, and in all likelihood will be nominated by the country's ruling parties. So now we're talking about this growing gap between citizen demands for democracy and the supply side on the part of political elites, especially those staying in power beyond their mandate. So why does this matter? And Fonteh, this gets more directly to your question, the outgrowths of this. It matters because evading term limits have been shown to carry far-reaching consequences for Africa's governance, for its stability and security, and for its overall development. So for instance, according to some really great research that's been done by the Africa Center for Strategic Studies here in Washington, D.C., since 2000, at least 30 African presidents have tried to extend their rule, and 18 of them have thus far succeeded. Relatedly, today, a staggering 9 out of the 10 African countries facing civil conflicts, excluding insurgencies by military Islamist groups, are those without term limits. So we've seen how this has affected stability and security. On the governance side, the lack of term limits has resulted in 10 leaders, or about 1 in 5 on the continent, who have ruled for over 20 years, as well as 3 family dynasties in Djibouti, Gabon, and Togo that have been in power for nearly a century combined. And on the stability side, the third instance, the 10 African countries that are the largest source of Africa's estimated 29 to 30 million refugees and internally displaced people, 8 of those countries, 8 out of the 10 lack term limits. So the correlations here are pretty stark and the ramifications myriad. One other issue that I know we'll delve into a bit later, but that I would raise really quickly here, is that the lack of respect for democracy and democratic norms, such as term limits, has had and will continue to have profound effects on Africa's overall development, both human and economic. And like I said, I look forward to delving more into that as this conversation proceeds today.
Well, thank you very much. I think the discussion is very easily coalescing around the question of democratic governance on the continent. When you look at the map of Africa today, about 44 of the continent's 54 countries have some kind of conflict or violence as well. And while we are not necessarily trying to paint a too bleak picture of Africa and the challenges ahead, are there any correlations between lack of democratic governance and the kinds of instability that lead to the patterns of insecurity that we see? Jeffrey, it's a follow-up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the data shows that. You know, the data that I referenced from the Africa Center for Strategic and International Studies, I know the Institute for Security Studies, which obviously you're very familiar with, have also done some research on this. And I think that the larger point here, although instability is a key outgrowth of anti-democratic authoritarian governance, the key issue here is that democracy has been shown to improve countries, not just in Africa, but worldwide on a number of fronts. I think, it's really important, particularly living in this era that we are now, to continue to make the point that first and foremost, democracy has been shown to improve a nation's overall health. And this is because, as we know, and hopefully those listening today, democratic governments are inherently more open. They're inherently more accountable and transparent, as well as protective of media freedom and access to information, which is crucially important during a pandemic like we're living through now. And this creates an enabling environment. This allows leaders to be more responsive and use feedback to improve the quality of basic services. Democratic nations have also been shown to increase and use their own spending on healthcare in long term, which benefits all sides involved. And I think, again, during the era of COVID-19 and during this global pandemic in which we're currently living, these truths have become especially evident in Africa. I think it's no coincidence that Africa's most democratic countries, and I think Senegal and Namibia, and maybe Aisha can speak more to this, really stand out as 2 prime examples, having outperformed their repressive counterparts in Africa and worldwide. Senegal specifically, the Foreign Policy magazine has an index which measures effective government response to the pandemic, and Senegal is actually #1 in the world. which, again, shouldn't really surprise us given how they have a democratic culture ingrained in the country. They have strong democratic institutions. They have term limits. They have changeovers of power, and they respect the rule of law. And I think, secondly, the really important point here, too, is that there is strong and mounting evidence as well that democracy leads to stronger economies. So often many people are fooled by this mythic notion of the benevolent dictator, the Paul Kagame types of the world. And that needs to be dismantled, to my mind. I think the democratic advantage is profound. It's backed up by evidence. It's backed up by mounting data. And it's especially pronounced for African countries that have remained democratic for longer periods of time, including those that have respected term limit restrictions. More often than not, as we know, autocrats and other abusive leaders fail to implement the needed reforms that would sustain growth, whether human or economic, because they're not held accountable and because development, military, and security aid often flow regardless, and they really have no incentive to act in the public interest. So I think those are two key issues, crucial issues to bring up in this context.
No, thank you very much. Before we go to the recorded question, I would like to ask Aisha, from her experience in Senegal, would you be able to tell us within the West Africa region, what are the major challenges that civil society is confronted with today, and how has that changed over the past few months?
Thank you for the question. We are all, I would say, most civil society and even outside of Africa are faced with the issue of a shrinking civic space. More and more states actually are trying to control what people put out online specifically, or when people are even protesting. For instance, in Senegal, which is known as a democratic country, we've had regular elections, democratic change of governments. But you see, there's an organization called France Dégage FRAP, which recently just went in front of one of the telecom companies to protest against the hike in data prices. And just because they were there in front of the telecom company to hand over an envelope or protest letter, they were picked up by the police. So, of course, not all African countries have the same issues, but there are issues in each and every one of them. So one of the challenges we have, I would say, in West African civil society is, the executive trying as much as possible to control the civic space and trying to silence or to repress or crack down on either opposition or dissenting voices. And this has created an alternative and it has strengthened the collaboration between civil society organizations in West Africa and beyond. Recently, a civil society solidarity campaign has been launched for Guinea that will be holding elections. If you go back to last year, there have been many people, at least between 50 and 90 people have been killed in Guinea because they have been protested against the change of the constitution that has allowed now the president of Guinea to stand in elections, to stand for a third term. So there's a solidarity campaign launched, and we are creating a coalition to be able to not only, act at national level, but also at regional and even continental level. And what civil society organizations are doing, it's going beyond just the internal aspect of it. We're taking the African solidarity at another level. If there's a possibility of launching a complaint against the government at the ECOWAS court, it is done. If there's a possibility of doing a coordinated campaign or protest campaign against a given government in the region, it's being done. Each and every civil society organization understands now it's no longer about an issue of, concerning one country. If you look at Guinea and Ivory Coast right now, everyone is tense because any crisis, be it in Guinea or in Ivory Coast, is going to impact the whole region. And this is very unfortunate because if you look at the path of the two leaders, Guinea's president Alpha Condé has been in the opposition for over 40 years, has been called a democratic leader. He comes to power and now he wants to extend his power. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And the other unfortunate thing is the fact that it's only around elections and that you have this crisis in Africa. Most crises are election related, be it before, during, or after elections. I think we should be able to have normal elections without people dying, without people having to protest for their basic rights that are, enshrined in all these constitutions that you see, but are difficult to implement because for one reason or the other, we had the 1990s period where you had regular elections being held in different African countries and the cities opening up for people to speak up and their rights to be respected. And all of a sudden, it's like we have to fight to keep the democratic achievements that we've been able to have since independence. And yet we have to fight harder to make sure that new rights that we want to be respected are respected. So it's challenging, but if you see people outside, I'll give an example of what's happening in Nigeria with the NSAP protests. If you see people being mobilized, if you see people standing for their rights, you know that whatever you're doing in civil society, you're doing the right thing. And that's something that's important. People know that they want better, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that that better Africa they want is happening in their country.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for those elements. I would like to know whether, Veronica, we can roll out Andrea's question.
The support of African voices has also played a role in the offensive of the People's Republic of China against the G4 initiative launched in 2005 to obtain a reform of the UN Security Council. In your opinion, how the People's Republic of China influence is shaping the continent's political future? What do you think of the coalition of African and Asian movement to empower democracy and rule of law? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, I don't know if you captured, did you hear that clearly, or would you want me to echo it? Okay, I can see Aisha shaking her head. The question was, how do we think that the People's Republic of China, through its actions in the UN Security Council and otherwise, would shape the future of the continent of Africa? And what do you think about the possibility of an African-Asian alliance to actually champion the interests of the African continent? Aisha?
I would say personally, when African governments, because they represent their countries, go and negotiate with any partner, they have to put their interests first, whoever the partner is. For me, that's the basic. Be it China, be it the US, be it Europe, your people's interests should be first. And then you negotiate and see. It's not because you are a so-called developing country that you have to accept any deal that's given to you. That's my stance on any relationship with anyone. Given regarding the Security Council, I think this is not a new call or discussion. I don't see how in the 21st century, Africa, which represents 54 or 55 countries, depending whoever is talking, doesn't have a seat at the Security Council. That's something that comes every year that African countries complain about. Yes, our house is not in order. We have to settle things. Who is going to represent the continent if it's one seat? But still, I don't think that it is right now in this day and age for Africa not to have a seat at the Security Council. You earlier talked about this new world order coming up. I am happy that actually there is a new way of seeing things and new way of doing things, especially from an African's perspective. Because for me, it's being able to negotiate your interests first, whoever is coming, and however big the deal, however big the handbag with money, name it, but you put your interests first. And talking about that's to outside and now internally to Africans. It's true that our institutions actually have to be restructured or even revamped, be it the African Union, the ECOWAS, the West Africa Regional Organization, because the issue we have is that there are commissions who don't necessarily have the powers, and the powers are with the head of states who, depending on their interests, sometimes have difficulties of speaking with one voice and being able to defend an African standpoint. So for me, the solidarity we have at the civil society and people's level, that's the way things should go. In the past 5 to 10 years, we've been talking about an ECOWAS. ECOWAS is regional West African regional organization. We want an ECOWAS of the people. We want an African Union of the people, and not like a syndicate of head of states who was just there to look at their interests. For me, if we start with what people want, we will be able to go to the table with enough agency to negotiate whichever deal we have and with whichever partner we have in front of us, be it the US, the EU, China. That's my point on that.
Thank you very much, Aisha. For the next round of questions, I would like us to move with very rapid fire answers and take maximum 1 minute so we could go through a number of questions. Talking about interest, Jeffrey, Untitled, the Slido questions came up and I think they went down again before I had the chance to pose them. Untitled published that every year 88.6 billion disappears out of Africa illegally. This is about 3.7% of Africa's GDP and almost as much as the total amount of development aid, which is 48 billion, and foreign direct investment, which is 54 billion together. How will Africa tackle enormous corruption on the continent, and whose interest does this corruption serve anyways? Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's a really tough question and a really complex issue to untangle. And I think, this is firmly why I believe a rethink here is long overdue. I think when you're talking about the massive amounts of money that is, essentially, I don't want to say lost, because we know whose pockets they go into. They go into the ruling elite. They go into big corporations. But that's, I think, goes to Aisha's point about not having, very robust, democratic, accountable institutions in many of these countries. So I think that's why, this is perhaps a larger point, but, relevant here. I think development organizations, donors, bilateral donors, including sovereign governments alike, should take this as a really excellent excuse to add democracy promotion to their funding portfolios. In other words, aid givers, whether they're foundations or philanthropic organizations or governments like the United States, for instance, where I sit today, they should prioritize the democratic demands and the accountability demands of African citizens and allocate those resources accordingly. I think it's long overdue to start addressing the root causes of the corruption that we see on the continent, the overall backsliding that we've witnessed over the past 15 years, and to stop merely applying Band-Aids to its evident symptoms.
Thank you very much. I'd like to switch back to Aisha. The question would refer to entrenched regimes like we have seen and that have been raised through the discussions in Equatorial Guinea, Chad, Cameroon, Republic of Congo. What options are there really for the people to usher in effective, peaceful transitions from these entrenched authoritarian states?
I would say there is no size fit all. Each country has its specificity. I would like to talk about the example of the Gambia, where you had Yahya Jammeh, who was there for over 22 years as head of state. And the ideal solution will be to have, like you said, a peaceful transition of power through the ballot box. That's what happened in the Gambia. Jammeh was voted out. But what we are seeing is more and more governments trying to lock up any possibility of having a democratic change of power. I think the possible solution for me, and the only one I see, is for civil society and with citizens at the core to continue mobilizing and demand for a change of regime, for separation of power, effective separation of power, and development.
So I would like to switch, given that we have discussed quite a bit about the challenges facing Africa, I would like to switch gears a little bit here to opportunities. I think Aisha started painting the picture of the opportunities that can be seized with civil society coming together. Jeffrey, in about 1 minute, what opportunities do you see for Africa in the future?
Yeah, another great question. I think, speaking as an American who works on African issues with African leaders and partners over the past decade plus, I think the key issue here, and I think this theme is coming out more and more as we move further along this conversation, is to treat Africa not as a special case, but as an equal partner on par with any other region of the world. It really bothers me when I hear about, the war for Africa, and it's posed as this, existential fight between the United States and China or Russia. And I think that's just an entirely backward framing of the situation. So treating it as an equal partner on par with every other region of the world is the opportunity that needs to be seized. And along these lines, again, speaking as an American, American presidents and American leaders of both political parties going back decades really need to stop cozying up to retrograde dictators, often in the name of stability. I think we always have to ask, stability for whom? Is it stability for civil society? Is it stability for the political opposition or the media community or the human rights community who are being brutalized with impunity by some of the worst of the worst repressive regimes in the world, again, all under this guise of stability. But again, stability for whom? I think that's the important question we need to start asking. But, sort of looping back to the opportunities really quickly, I think the larger point here is a robust and powerful Africa in the 21st century. It cannot be built on these remnants of the old guard, leaders who have been in power longer than most of their citizens have been alive. Fonteh, you mentioned a few of them in Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, Chad, Uganda, Congo-Brazzaville, leaders who have been in there for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, who often play the terrorism card or the oil card to deflect legitimate criticism and stifle democracy. And in this way, I think there's an opportunity for Africa's democratic standard bearers to take this opportunity in a world in which there's a very clear leadership void at the moment, to flex their collective muscle and take the stage and lead on these issues.
Very important issues. And I'd like to switch back to Aisha here to continue the conversation around how Africa goes from being perceived as one which has to obey instructions to one being treated as an equal partner. We all know that it's not going to get given to Africa. So what role can civil society play in actually moving Africa to that position where it gets considered as an equal partner?
Thank you for that question, Fonteh. I would just want to talk briefly about opportunities, because I think it's important to talk about the youth bulk. 60% of Africans are young people, and if you look at all in the countries, youth are energetic, they're creative, innovative, and they're ready to go for it, and they want a new way of doing things. Like Jeffrey said, we are tired of having the old guards. We want a new way. We are just celebrating about 60% for, I would say, most countries, 60% of 60 years of independence. We're celebrating the liberation from the colonizers. But my strong belief is that when we go to 100th anniversary, we don't know if we'll be here. But what I'm saying from today is the youth, they will be able to build and represent a leadership that reflects their realities and what they want. So I just wanted to talk about that. So what can civil society do? Civil society actually engage with their counterparts from other countries in an equal level. Jeffrey talked about the collaboration he has with many partners. And from my own experience, when we were working on the Gambia, it has always been on an equal, an equal partner. And we are trying to change the narrative. It's not, yes, Africa has its issues. We have many problems, but also we're trying to get out of it. And resilience, when you say resilience, all development agencies are talking about that, but for me, the African represents resilience. If you look at all we went through, from slavery, from colonization, generation upon generation, people are still, ready to get up and fight and, want something better than that. So civil society has a great role to play. And I think it's for our government, our different countries, to be able to recognize and acknowledge the fact that civil society is an important power. I would say maybe the fifth power after the fourth, which is the media, that needs to always be on the table and be able to represent people's voice. Because what tends to happen is we tend to see a kind of a disconnect between what the leaders are doing and what the people's reality are doing. So I think having a connection will help actually African governments represent their people better when discussing with the outer world that's outside Africa and in their different exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. And I would like to push back a little bit, if you don't mind. We often talk about the youth bulge. We talk about Africa's population advantage and all of these issues. So how is it that so few people are capable to pretty much hold parts of the continent hostage for so long, for the continent not to reach its potential? And what needs to be done concretely to move from where we are to where we want to be on the continent?
I would say the few who are in power are very smart, actually, and every day they're finding new ways of trying to entrenching themselves. Maybe because I'm a journalist, but for me, access to information is central in any democracy. Access to information. If the people have the right information and they have the information in the language they speak and understand, they will be able to, express themselves, express what they want. But that's not all. Also, the people need to understand how the system works, how the different powers, the three, be the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, are connected to each other, and and the fact that they're actually representing them to be able to build a democratic society. As long as we have a small group of people continuing to make sure that people, the majority don't have all the information they should have to be able to make an informed decision on different issues affecting them, we will continue to be with this situation where you have group of elite from generation to generation who are still, in the corridors of power or in power, or etc. So for me, access to information and respect for basic rights, the right to assembly, the right to association, the right to be able to express themselves as citizens. And another important point I want to put, for me, it doesn't come from the national level. It should start at the grassroots level. At the local level, be it a municipality or any other local government structure you have, citizens should have representatives who, are making sure that the local government is taking into consideration their needs and aspirations. And then you'll be able to take it at the central, at the central level and make it national and then continental. As long as we don't have that issue settled, we will continue to have this, because it's very easy for the executive to use the security forces in the name of stability and security to oppress their people continuously. We see these days their protests in Namibia and Nigeria, and people are being, beaten, people are being tear gassed. So maybe I'm utopic, but my belief is basic rights need to be respected and people need to be given the respect that they deserve. And then we will have a society where everyone is playing his or her role as they're supposed to.
Thank you very much, Aisha. On that note, we are heading towards the end of this panel. I would give really 15 seconds to Jeffrey for a final word.
Yeah, I would echo what Aisha was saying. I think building links of solidarity and collective action from the bottom up is crucial, and also support to Africa's democratic standard bearers, of which there are plenty. Along that point, just really quickly, I think one thing we didn't touch upon that I think is so crucially important is that we have to remember that women and youth make up an overwhelming majority of Africa's population. So together, they will have an outsized impact in the years ahead, and they are deserving of support.
Excellent. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor to moderate this discussion on the future of Africa, literally. Africa is a continent which is faced with a number of challenges going forward, which have been exacerbated by the current COVID dynamics and which is challenged globally by the reversals in multilateralism. But today we have heard that from the bottom up, Africa can actually build itself to take its place within global affairs by working from the community level to build accountability, representation, and legitimacy, by working collaboratively as civil society with like-minded partners across borders and to create regional civil society frameworks that could in fact challenge the existing order. We could see the promise of Africa actually rising from a youth which, with access to information which should come cheaper for Africans, we think that there is the possibilities for Africa to meet its promise for prosperity. And thank you very much, Jeffrey, as well, for all of your interventions, for setting the scene with this picture of Africa, which is facing many, many challenges, but also for the possibilities that exist. It's been a pleasure moderating you, and I hope we can continue to have this discussion going forward informally by email, now that I have both of your emails.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
From Africa back to our studio here in Prague. Welcome back to our final concluding panel. We will talk about the highlights and main commentaries from today's opening day of the 24th conference of the Forum 2000. It's the 24th conference, however, it's really a new experience for us because it's first time we are completely online, so it's very exciting for all of us. My name is Irena Kalhousova. I teach at the Charles University in Prague. At the same time, I'm also a member of the program committee here at Forum 2000. And it's really a pleasure for me to moderate this final concluding panel of the conference. We live in times which are characterized by a lack of stability and predictability, or to quote Anthony Giddens from today's morning panel or afternoon panel, he said, we live in a period of dazzling change. And I am very happy that we have here with us Asha Ahmed Muilu, journalist and documentary filmmaker from Kenya, and Yossi Klein-Halevi, who is author, a journalist and senior fellow at Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, Israel, who are here with us and will help us to summarize the highlights of the first day conference. So welcome to our panel. And yes, I would like to ask you, what do you think were the main ideas we heard today at the conference? What resonated with you the most? And I will first ask Asha to start. And I'm sorry, we will need to be very brief, so I'll give you 2 minutes to summarize what do you think was the most important we heard today at the conference.
Thank you, Irena, and I'm glad to be here. So right at the beginning of the conference, there is something that British historian Timothy Garton Ash said, and it resonated with me right at the beginning and throughout the panels that I've watched. He reflected about the challenges that the world is going through, and talked about how he sees the world could get through the dark times. And his 4 points were truth, solidarity, strategy, and responsibility. And I've had so many panelists across the afternoon just talk about these 4 points and using even some of these words. So truth, the coronavirus has shown us that even in authoritarian states like Tanzania, who don't want to reveal the real data or statistics on coronavirus, that truth prevails, right? That there's things that you just can't hide. And for us as humanity, once we acknowledge our truths, whether they're negative or positive, it is the beginning of advancing towards a better future. Solidarity, coming together. COVID-19 made us all come together and, reflect on a better world. And strategy, how do we strategize about the future? And finally, responsibility. And I think, the climate this year showed us we need to take the responsibility. So for me, Irena, that Timothy's utterances right at the beginning, I felt just wrapped up everything that resonated with me throughout the afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for pointing out also some positive conclusions from the first day, because otherwise, many panels were somehow gloom and doom. So thank you very much for talking about a positive lesson learned from the pandemic and other global issues we are facing. So Yossi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Like Aisha, my takeaway is also surprisingly hopeful. And what I heard was really that this moment is a convergence of 4 very significant events. The first is that we are experiencing humanity's first truly global event, which is happening in real time, where we know exactly what's happening in different parts of the world, and everyone is experiencing, to one extent or another, the same sense of fear, of anticipation, of awareness of mortality, of our fragileness. The second major moment is the technological breakthroughs that we're experiencing, which is enhancing our sense of global awareness. There's technology that has been around for a few years. I'm thinking of tools like Zoom and Skype, but suddenly we've discovered that we can use these tools in ways that were inconceivable before. I find myself speaking to people throughout the Arab world, sitting in Jerusalem, speaking in countries where Israelis are not allowed by other governments to be in conversation with, and yet I'm using Skype, I'm using WhatsApp, and so something has broken through the barriers. The third significant moment that's happening is, as Aisha said, climate change, and that is giving humanity an apocalyptic sense of urgency. We know we don't have a lot of time to deal with our systemic problems. And finally, the pandemic is happening at a time of major medical advances. If this were happening a century ago, millions would have already died. The fact that the numbers are not higher than they are is really gives us a sense of how far we've advanced at this moment, and I think it also gives us a feeling that we will be able to cope with climate change and any other problems that come our way if we have the will to do it.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for being positive. Nonetheless, I will push you a little bit further now. I would like to ask you about the most worrisome trends in our societies today. What did we hear about what the humankind is facing? What worries you the most? If I may start again with Aisha.
Thank you. I mean, there are a couple of things that worry me, and a lot of the panelists brought them out. Of course, coming from Africa, we know about the rise of authoritarianism, no accountability with some of our governments, and that was actually brought out not just from Africa, but a lot of the other global South countries. But for me, I think what is so urgent is the issue of climate change, because in Eastern Africa, we've had a couple of issues, not just the coronavirus pandemic. Before COVID-19 got to this region, we were dealing with a locust invasion, which is attributed by scientists as one of the effects of climate change. Right now, we are seeing the lakes bursting their banks in the Rift Valley and, swallowing populations. And for me, I feel like it's such an urgent issue. And I could see even the panel on climate change sort of like going back and forth over what the solution is. But the realization was that even in this year where the world was forced to pause, the world was forced to stop and halt air travel, it didn't make much of a difference. We had 5 to 7% reduction in emissions, and that falls short of UNEP's goal. And Arunabha Ghosh from the Council on Energy and Water from India said it right, that the pandemic actually played out a social experiment for us, that what happens when we pause as the world is that the solution to some of the issue that we're going through in terms of climate change. And guess what? It wasn't enough. So as human beings, as global citizens, it's just become a reality check for us that it was got to give, whether you believe in it or not, whatever the solution is. This year was that reality check that we need to stop and act really, really fast.
Thank you very much. Yossi?
Yeah, I'm worried about two political trends. The first is the weakening of the center and the rise of populism, the far right and the far left. We're seeing that happening in countries around the world, certainly happening in the United States very strongly. The second trend that we're experiencing, certainly here in Israel and in other democracies, is a weakening of democratic institutions, sensibilities. For the first time in Israel's history, the government has placed a limitation on public protests, and the strong fear is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is using COVID as an excuse to try to curtail public opposition. Fortunately, it isn't working, but we see that trend happening all around the world.
And the opposite question, what do you think, what are the positive lessons we learned from this very unstable situation we live in now, when we have this big shifts caused by digitalization, of course, the climate change, and now the global pandemic. So what are you a little bit positive? Did we see some positive trends following this major crisis we now live in? And maybe I will start with Yossi for change, so Aisha has a little bit more time to think about the question.
In some sense, I think that this moment is the equivalent of the first space launching in the 1950s, when the photo images of planet Earth were broadcast back to us, and we were stunned. I wasn't conscious then, but humanity was stunned by the fragileness, the smallness, the compactness of planet Earth, and the intimacy, the fact that we really are a single organism. And I think that the space age was really the beginnings of a genuine global consciousness. When we speak about monotheism as oneness, the oneness of God, but I think that there's something in this time that gives us the experience of oneness, and COVID is the frightening side of that experience. We have had our first, as I said earlier, our first genuinely universal experience. And that, I believe, will give us the emotional tools to deal as a planet with the challenges that Aisha was speaking about earlier.
Thank you. I think it's a very nice message that actually we are a single organism and we will get out of this together, hopefully, out of this pandemic. Aisha, please.
Thank you. I think my point is actually something that Yossi mentioned right at the beginning about, what the pandemic taught us, digitization. There's the panel on fighting the politics of hate. One panelist said that the proposal is that we can only fight the politics of hate by using the politics of empathy and tolerance. And I really think that that is something that we can take forward. I saw that in play, through social media in this part of the world, especially right when the pandemic was beginning. I mean, social media has been so crucial in this time in a lot of African countries, to the point that, it's now being used to even fight authoritarianism. Just yesterday, Nigerians on Twitter, had a big win. They had this hashtag #EndSARS, and they were basically asking the government to disband this police service, this police unit that was going around, firing at protesters and brutalizing people. And, President Buhari listened to people online. So I do think that there's such a hope. And even as we look at social media as sometimes very menacing, as that panel on the politics of hate mentioned, that it actually addresses people's realities, and we need to look at, using it for good. So for me, it's, that message of politics, tolerance, of empathy is what I want to take forward from this year's conference.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very nice message, the end. And with this, we will conclude today's conference, Forum 2000. I would like to invite you tomorrow, because the conference continues. We will start again at 2 o'clock Central European time, and we will talk about Belarus, about Bolivia, about the United States. We will address the issues which are related to Asia, and we will also talk about technology and authoritarian regimes. And we will have Ivan Havel, the brother of Václav Havel, addressing the conference. So you are more than welcome to join us tomorrow, again, fully online. And I wish you all the best, and good night to Asia, good evening to Europe and Africa, more or less, and have a good day in the United States and Latin America. So thank you very much, Aisha. Thank you very much, Yossi, for being with us, and please join us tomorrow at 2 o'clock CET. Thank you.
Thank you.